Welcome, everybody. I'm really happy that you all chose to come today on this beautiful day when we could be out in our gardens. And instead, we're going to learn how to make our gardens more beautiful. So thank you for coming. My name is Jill Farrow, and I'm the lead volunteer for the Corvallis Public Seed Library. It is a project of the Corvallis Sustainability Coalition's Food Action Team and of the Corvallis Public Library. And we get educational support from the Benton County Master Gardeners and OSU Extension Service. I am both a Food Action Team member and a certified Master Gardener, so I wear both hats. And my personal objective is to help people grow more food, which is the mission of this public seed library. So I'm delighted, very happy that we get to have Cynthia share her knowledge with us. Cynthia Dort of Dort Farm. It's going to teach us everything we want to know about earthworm composting so that we can improve our soil by using worm casting. I just love the concept that it's a free twofer, that we buy the food that we eat and the coffee that we want to drink, and then our waste becomes free food for the worms, so we get to nurture other living beings that have worms. And then those worms do their thing, and as a natural course, of course, they poop, and that becomes their worm castings, which then become enrichment for our soil, which then helps our plant to grow more healthy, our soil microbes to be more healthy, which makes our food that we grow in our gardens more healthy, right? So it's like, woohoo, we win, right? And all that other stuff is just a free outcome of what we already chose to buy for ourselves. So we're gifting and receiving in return, which is a lovely concept to me. So thank you for being willing to teach us what we need to know. So Cynthia is the co-founder of the Dort Worm Farm, which was founded in 1998 as a learning project for your then middle school age children. I just think that's neat. The things we get involved in for our kids, we have no idea how that then will change the direction of our own lives. Isn't that a wonderful thought when you volunteer to do something that you have no idea it's going to become your business and your passion? I mean, yeah, that's hats off for that example. Anyway, a newspaper article about worm farming sent them down to San Diego to the Williams Worm Farm, where they learned the basics of the business. They joined the Corvallis Farmers Market shortly thereafter and now sell at the Saturday and Wednesday outdoor markets in Corvallis and alternative dates with the Lebanon and McMinnville markets on Thursday. So there's opportunities to purchase some of the things that she will speak with us about, the worm castings, the worm tea, and the worms for y'all if you wish to proceed with your own worm farms. So with that, I'll say thank you, Cynthia. When we have Q&A opportunities and visit at the table opportunities later, I want to make sure that you all know that the Corvallis Library has some wonderful books on slugs. One is for adults. This is a how-to kind of book. And as it turns out, there's a newer edition with Cynthia brought. I didn't know that. Our library's a lot out of date, but it's a good book. And then I always try to find ways too that we can see what children's books are available at the library. And they have 3 awesome children's slug and worm books, and then also some cool slug books. So spring break is coming up. Some of us may be grandparents, some of us may be parents, some of us may have kids in our lives or be involved in 4-H programs. But spring break is coming up too, right? And there's lots of wonderful opportunities, ways that we can encourage children to begin to explore more in the garden and get involved in what we're doing. And making a worm bin could be kind of a fun activity over spring break too. So think about book opportunities at the library as well. So with that. Thank you.
So thank you, Jill, for the opportunity to share this product that we discovered 27 years ago. When I taught school, I was across the hall from a teacher who had 3 sons. He took them out of school at middle school to homeschool them, and they started a honey business that they sold at the farmer's market. And it wasn't too long after that that I had started my family and resigned from the school district and started going to the farmers markets with my kids. And I'd see them there. And it just seemed like a really great thing to do with children. And as our children grew, I mean, we had two boys and a girl. Girls like worms too. And that's what I've discovered over the years too. The little 4-year-olds especially love to look at the worms. And we just saw an article, went down to get the worms. We bought 2 pounds, brought them back, left them in the mother-in-law's garage in San Jose with probably 90 or 100-degree temperatures, and they all died. And so we ended up ordering the worms from the Williams Worm Farm, and the rest is history, as they say. So one of the reasons we chose the worms also is that they are they're so important to our world, to the environment. And it intrigued us that you could contribute to the knowledge of what worms do. And it's been a learning journey, and it's been a lot of fun. And we meet a lot of great people. So I think I'll start off with, think about an apple tree. So an apple tree is in the soil, grows the apples get picked, some fall to the ground. And those apples that fall to the ground will rot. And as they rot, microbes are released. There's all kinds of material there that worms love. And they'll go in and eat that, and it'll go through the worm, and the castings come out the other end, and the tree benefits from everything that goes on in the soil. So soil is pretty much made of rocks and decaying plant and animal material. And the rocks, of course, have been ground down to where it can be consumed. The worms will eat the rocks and the decaying animal and plant material. And they use what they can, and it goes through the worm, and that produces the castings. And on the castings is a mucus that carries enzymes and nutrients, undigested nutrients, things that the worm didn't need, can go back into the soil. And then that interacts with the soil and makes it better soil. They create a humus that has everything the soil needs to nourish the plants. The humus helps the soil hold water. It keeps it from hardening. It makes it easier for the plants to take up the nutrients. And the worms all contribute to that activity. So I just have a feeling most of you already know that, or you wouldn't be here, that you know that the worms do a good job with the soil. So what they excrete has a neutral pH of 7. And even if it's an acidic soil, what comes out of the worm will be neutral. And so the castings are not a potting soil on its own, because it's too loose for one thing, but it needs that soil to make a complete nourishment for the plants, but it boosts that nourishment. So you would use it in a 1-to-4 concentration. 1 part castings to 4 parts soil. And you would have to figure that out kind of on your own. If you were potting a plant in a gallon container, you'd use 1 part castings you'd have to figure out how many pints at a gallon and whatever. But and then if you've got larger beds that you're working with, that might be a little more difficult. But okay. So okay. There are trace minerals and micronutrients. There's food for other microbes. There's 1,000 bacteria, enzymes, undigested plant and animal material. And the composting actually continues with the castings. They're still breaking down and adding to the soil, those components. There's 65 to 70% organic material, and they hold the nutrients in a mucous membrane imparted by the worms, so that they release those nutrients over time. They don't get it all at once. So that's another advantage to using the castings. So what I'm going to show you is how to make a worm bin. And this is a Rubbermaid container. And the plan is one that Seattle Tealth made available. I went to a worm conference many years ago in Portland and received quite a few materials that are beneficial. So this bin, it's rather easy to do. It's 20 inches by 14 inches, and up to this point, 16 inches deep. And because it has these indentations and lines around it, it's really quite simple to mark it up for drilling holes and putting vents in. So the worm's needs are moisture, oxygen, food, of course, and temperature. So the pH. The pH needs to be neutral. The temperature needs to be between 55 and 79 degrees. And the moisture, not too wet, not too dry. To test the moisture, you can squeeze it. Take a handful in your hand and squeeze it. If you get droplets across your knuckles, it's just right. If it streams, it's too wet. If it's nothing, it's too dry. So those are the needs of the worm. I should talk about the worm. The worms we use are Icenia fetida. And there are 9,000 species of worms in the world, but only 7 of them are appropriate for composting in your home. There are blue worms, there are all kinds of different ones, but the Icenia fetida is probably your best. It's settled on pretty much in North America anyway, that it tolerates temperatures differences better than others. It tolerates moisture conditions that are not ideal. It tolerates pH changes, even though the pH should be neutral, even though, you know, but this particular worm can tolerate differences. So that's probably the one, if you're going to buy worms, you'll want to know what kind they are. And I talked to a gentleman from Hawaii at the market at one time, and he said they don't allow Icenia fetida there, but they do have blue worms. And blue worms is one of the composting worms that people can use. Yes.
You're using the Latin name for the worm you're recommending here. Is the common name for that worm that you're recommending for here, the red wiggler?
It's red wiggler, manure worm, red worm, right? And there are other worms that are called red worms. And so I use that because that's the specific worm that uh, has those qualities.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking. Okay. So when you build a bin, you're going to want to have air circulation, you're going to want to have drainage, and you're going to want to have a lid. They like the dark, they move away from the light. And I'll show you how to do this one. The tools up here that you would need, this is a 3-inch bit. There's a 3/4 inch bit, a 1-inch bit, and a 1/4 inch drill bit. And so you would drill holes in the bottom. I just use a ruler to kind of make an X with a marker. And there's it's 4 by 5, 25, 24, 4 by 5, 20 holes in the bottom. And then what's nice about this particular bin is that to space 5 louvered vents across the front, you could hold a ruler along this line and use your marker. You'd hold this up here and use your marker to make a mark underneath. And you do that all the way across. You mark this one first and do the same thing on that side, mark that one. And then the third one is going to go right in the middle. So you can just kind of measure where the middle is with your ruler and make your mark. And then it came out to be 3.5 inches on either side. So at 3.5, you would mark that one. I used to use a cardboard that I folded and marked up, but I realized that this is easier to do. Then you would punch these in.
Where
Those
do
are
you
1-inch
get
holes?
those?
So I get them at True Value Hardware. I know Home Depot carries this size. This is a 2-inch. And these are 1-inch. And you just pop them in. I put the louvers going down. We're looking for airflow. because they require oxygen.
Bother put the vents in.
Because the worms could crawl out. Yeah. They've got little screens on them. So I can talk about that a little bit while I'm doing this. When you bed your worms, you can use shredded newspaper. You'd fill the bin with shredded newspaper and then dampen it to the consistency of a wet, wrung out sponge. And that would provide bedding. Some recommend core coconut fiber, which retains water. And others recommend sphagnum moss from Canada. Apparently peat moss is not as good that you get in America. It would, it holds moisture and apparently can, I think what I read was that peat moss, they can't eat that, but they can maybe eat the sphagnum moss. And they can't eat the core. This particular bin recommends the core. And this is a commercial variety that I was going to share with you too. So you put the so these are the ones you use the 1 inch bit width, and with this one you use the 2 inch. And again, the lid itself kind of shows you where to put them. It has a little rectangle here. So you just fit that, making sure that you clear the edge there with the outer part and draw a circle around it and cut it out and then just pop them in. And then the other bin, it requires 2 bins because you're going to use one for drainage. Because you want to keep the bin from getting too wet. And this is a Coleman cooler replacement valve. And the original instructions showed a very complicated thing that you had to find the parts in different places. And then I was directed to one of these, and it's very simple. You just unscrew it. This is the one that requires the 3/4 inch drill. And you put that, I used the ruler to determine that it can go that low and still clear the ground. Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
Change the measurements on you.
Well, had to allow for that thread. And he didn't. Okay, I'm not gonna be able to get it in there. But, so maybe it's more than 3/4. Anyway, that's where it goes. And then you put the washer, reassemble it and screw it on. It's very simple to do if you have the right hole. Okay. And then it's done.
So the louvered holes only go on one side.
No. No, they're on both sides.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, they're on both sides. And then this would go in here. And you'd use the other lid is a drain tray. And that'd be it. If you have a paper shredder, you can shred newspaper. I have noticed that there's fewer newspapers these days, but and the inks used to be a concern, but apparently they are soy based. And so if you have colored paper, then it doesn't matter. So that's filled. You could put a little more in there. And then you would spray it, dampen it thoroughly.
Shredded paper work too?
Are you thinking of computer paper, that kind of thing? You could use that. It's not this is really absorbent, and they'll eat that. They'll eat the other paper too as well. But this is really absorbent. Yes.
I used leaves, fall leaves that had fallen.
Uh-huh.
Is there any reason not to do that?
They just take longer to break down. Yeah.
And when I got liquid in the bottom, but I never got so much liquid that valve was gonna help me.
Oh,
It's always below there, so I just picked up the inside pin
and
and,
just dump it.
yeah.
And that might be the best way to go. Yeah. Yes,
Can you use paper towels?
you probably could. They're very absorbent.
And do you just put the worms under the bedding? Is there anything else you put there?
Okay, so when you take home your worms, you'll want to have it all prepared. And you introduce them into the bin. You might want to hold off on food for a day or two. Let them settle in. I would keep it under a light at night with the lid off. They go away from the light because in a new situation, they might begin to crawl. But if they're under a light, they'll stay in. Let them settle in for a few days. And then make sure you're putting your food waste. So that's the other thing we need to talk about is what do you feed your worms? The worms will eat anything organic. But not everything organic is good for the bin. Yes.
So first you put in, you moisten all the shredded material.
Yeah.
It basically till it would ooze out if you squeeze it, is that?
Right.
Then you add the worms.
And then you add the worms.
Okay.
And you would bury the food. You can just lift up and bury the food
Okay.
and they'll find it. Yeah. So it has to be rotting. Yes.
If we go back to your comments about making the worms settle in at home and moving away from the light, if we've placed the worm bin indoors in our house, do you mean leave them, say, in a room with the overhead light of the room on and the lid off of the bin?
Yes. And I would suggest like a bathroom. Or
Do any of the worms actually crawl out of the bin while we're getting them acclimated to our new home?
they could.
Good.
They could. Yeah. They not necessarily, but they could.
Thank you.
We leave, when we harvest worms and need to save them over for a day or whatever, we leave them in the entry with a light on. And that's all it takes to keep them from crawling out.
In your, so, but they can't crawl out if the lid is on. So why do you want to expose?
Well, they'd be crawling. They'd be crawling around the edges. And they're not comfortable. And you want,
It's not on when she's doing that.
well, well, I was gonna say leave the lid off with the light until they get used to it, yeah.
So I figure if you're really worried about that, I bet you could just like get some screen and put that on top, so then they could still get the lighting and everything, but they can't crawl out. That'd be a good idea for that.
They're pretty
Well,
little.
you wouldn't need it with the light on,
Probably,
yeah. Yeah, we leave, these are the way we sell them, and we leave them just like that in the entry with the light on it. They don't go out. We did have a time when somebody turned the light off. And we had worms all over the entry. So the light really works. And when I show them at the market, if it's a sunshiny day and I turn them over and then I drop them back in, they just dive. If it's a foggy, not so sunny day, they kind of hang out on the top a little bit before they go down, but they're still light. Yeah. So
Do we get the worms from you? Do you sell them?
yes, we do at this farmer's market. And there'll be a schedule available to you. It starts April 18th.
About how many worms by weight or however you would measure them, do you need for a container like that?
Thank you for asking, because that's the next thing. It's to start, if you were to start with 1 pound of worms, they eat half their weight a day in food. And if you were to be feeding them half a pound a day, it would take about 4 to 6 months to fill the bin with castings. Our worms are bed run, which means that they have adults and babies and cocoons. So you aren't getting just all adults that could eat that down really quickly. That's why it's kind of a 4 to 6 month thing. And the babies are going to grow, the cocoons are going to hatch, you'll get more worms as you go. They double every 30 to 90 days. So by the end of your 3 to 6 months, you're going to have a lot more worms too. So yes,
You, when you have too many worms, if you don't sell them as an individual.
you can give them to your neighbor. You can put them in your garden. You can. So some people say they're going to take them home and put them in their garden. So the garden really does need to be have good soil, and you would want to feed in the garden. You'd want to put some of your waste in the garden, because they do need a highly organic. Yes.
So if we've purchased worms from you and they've doubled every 90 days and we now have a lot more worms, we've cleaned out our bin because it became full and we're starting anew. What is the right volume of worms to put back into your bin? Would that size bin be 1 pound of worms appropriate for that? So we would put
Yes.
1 pound in, and anything over the 1 is what we'd give to somebody else or find a new home for?
This worm could accommodate about 4 pounds.
That would be.
Yeah, you could leave them in there. It could it's got a square foot surface area of 2 square feet. So 2 square feet, 1 square foot accommodates about what did I just say? 4 pounds, yeah. So, yeah, 1 square foot accommodates 2 pounds. Is that how it goes?
2 square feet accommodate 4 pounds.
4 pounds, that's right. That's right. And this would fill up with 2.5 cubic feet of castings.
How do you separate your worms from your castings?
He had a question.
So so if you start out with feeding them a half pound a day,
Mhm.
then I assume you're gonna have to kind of ramp that up. How do you know if you're feeding them the right amount or too much or too little?
You can see how fast it goes.
Mhm.
Yeah. If you think they need more.
Okay.
And if it's just sitting there, maybe too much. Probably one of the biggest problems in a bin is too much, and it gets too wet.
Okay.
Yeah. And it can go anaerobic. That means that there's,
You asked your question.
Do you just put the food on top or should you dig it in?
I would bury it,
You bury
just bury it.
And is there anything you shouldn't put in there?
Yes. I started that about a while back. Yeah, as far as they'll eat anything organic, but not everything will be good in your bin. You think about meat, it takes a long time to decompose. It's going to create odors and that kind of thing. They would eat that once it was rotted away, but you don't want it in your bin. So you would, you want to put fruits, vegetables, eggshells, coffee grounds. There is a copy of a list of foods. You would not put poisonous plants. You wouldn't put, like I say, meat or pet feces, that kind of thing. Although they will eat all of that once it's broken down, but it's not going to smell good in your bin.
Right.
In fact, they make little septic containers for dog and cats. And the worms are happy, but you wouldn't be if it were in your bin. So those are the considerations you have to make is this going to smell? Is this going to contribute something that I don't want?
What about citrus?
And citrus apparently, so they like a neutral pH. And if you get too much of acidic food, then it wouldn't be good for them. You can put some in there. Some people say don't put it in at all. But if it's not too much, it'll still break down and they'll eat it and they'll be okay. That's what I mean about this particular worm is they can, they have parameters pH wise but they can push those parameters more than maybe some other kind of worm. Did you?
The question just flew out of my mind.
Sorry.
Oh,
Oh.
back to your food comment. How long, how the gentleman's question, how would we know if we should feed them more, or if we fed them too much? You said if the bin becomes too wet, that's too much. So my question is, how long is it rational for us to say, okay, I gave them a half pound of food yesterday. When I come today, I see it's all gone. Well, okay, I'll feed them a little more. But what if the inverse is true? I put out food today, it's all apparently still there tomorrow. How many days should it take for what we put out to go away? And
So
I want it to all go away, or should it just be
Yeah.
dribbling in?
Yeah, I would suggest that you not necessarily do strictly a half a pound a day. You don't have to feed them every day. You could feed them over a week's time that uh, And you can just monitor that and see how it goes. If it's getting too wet, then you've been giving them too much. I think, yeah.
What's the longest you can go without feeding them?
Probably about a week. If you've got this material in there, then they're gonna eat that. And yeah. And then,
How do you separate the worms from the compost?
okay, let me just see if there's another food question. Did you?
Just on the food, can you, do you need to chop it up? I mean, how, I assume it probably work better if you chop up your food scraps.
Some people do, some people don't.
Hmm.
I know a worm farmer that always, he blended his food to the worms. We just feed them manure. As far as I was looking at this morning, it says they like the small pieces of food. Well, if it's rotting, they're going to be able to eat it. It doesn't matter how big it is, it's all rotten. And like if you put a melon on your counter next to a carrot, the carrot's going to hold its firmness. It might begin to shrivel, but the melon's going to get moldy. And the worms are going to like the melon. They really like melon. And so it just depends on the food. Eventually they'll eat the carrot if once it's gotten to the point where it's actually rotting. But that's what they need because they're eating that bacteria and they're eating the microbes. They're absorbing what has already been acted upon. So your question is,
How do you separate the worms from the castings?
so there's different ways. You can start feeding on one side only, and they'll all move over to that area. And then you can take these castings out and then rebed and start feeding on the other side and then take these castings out. Probably a better way, I think, is to just dump it on a table under a light, spread it out, and the light, they'll go away from the light and they'll clump up underneath and you just take the castings off. That's actually how we harvest, is to put them under a light and remove the material on top. And then you rebed the worms and you use the casting. Yeah.
So after 4 to 6 months, will most of that newspaper be decomposed or eaten?
Yeah, they may have eaten that as well. Yeah.
So then are you frequently adding more newspaper, just kind of watching it and adding more?
So you don't really need to add because they're going to be in the castings. You'll be burying it in the castings.
So once you have a healthy amount of castings and worms, you can just take some of the castings and you don't have to add any more newspaper. So it's not like you're gonna need a large supply of newspaper frequently, because I was just wondering, where would I get newspaper?
I know.
And so one time, I think, you could find, but if they were constantly eating the newspaper and I had to replenish it, that would be challenging.
Right.
So you don't need if there's no newspaper in there, but lots of castings, it's fine.
Right. Well, and
What else is made out of paper? Shopping bags
cardboard is good.
or?
Cardboard is good. Yes.
As long as it's shredded.
Not necessarily. It'll rot. You could shred it, yeah, if you want to. Make it smaller, rot faster, but yeah. So I don't think I finished the food really. Yes.
So because the food rotting is part of the process, does it just end up smelling like compost? Like, is it something that,
There's no odor.
okay,
Yeah, there's no odor. That's one of the beauties of it. And the tea, there's no odor. In fact, if you have an odor with your tea, then you've got dead microbes and you don't want to use it on your plants. Yeah, that's why people can keep these in their homes because there's no odor. Yes.
Thanks.
So eventually will it just be that the worms are living in their own castings?
Or the worms?
Like, will it eventually become that the worms are living in their own castings with the new?
Yes. So there are different methods, and this book, this is our favorite. You can only get it by ordering, they'll print it when someone orders it. But one of the ways of doing your castings is the death method, they call it. You just let the worms keep working it till they die and they're gone. Because eventually there won't be any food, yeah. So like I said earlier, when they excrete the castings in the soil, there's still there's composting going on because there's still some dead material, there's still some decomposing material. And but if they're living in that and they've eaten everything that was still there, then it becomes very fine and the worms can't survive. So that's just one other way you can, and then you just start all over again. Yes.
Are the castings sterile? Could you use them in seed starting, with your seed starting soil?
It's a question. I didn't hear all of the question.
Are the
It's-
castings sterile?
Oh,
Can you use them with seed starting?
So how do you get it sterile? I guess I think of being heated and killing stuff. But if it has to be sterile.
As they come out of the box, they wouldn't be appropriate for starting seeds, would they?
I don't know why not.
Well, the seed starting material doesn't have fertilizer. It is sterile. This is compost, essentially.
Yeah.
And it is fertilizer.
So are you not supposed to start seeds with fertilizer?
it's not that it's not food, it's just that the seeds don't need a lot of fertilizing when
To
they
start, because they have everything they need in the seed.
So one of the,
But you're worried about the bacteria or whatever is breaking things down, harming the seeds, I think, because it's not sterile.
so one of the things about the tea, you can call it a fertilizer. I call it an amendment rather than fertilizer because it won't burn if it won't burn. You can use it straight, it won't burn, you can dilute it. It isn't really a dilution, but you can add up to 4 more bottles of water and spread the microbes around. So I would think the castings would have the same characteristic where it wouldn't be burning anything.
For the tea, do you just use it to water plants with, or can you spray directly on plants?
You can. In fact, it has properties of repelling or powdery mildew, black spot on roses, and white flies, I've heard, as a spray.
How often would you be able to harvest the worm tea from like an average setup like this?
So we have a compost tea maker. We fill the basket with a certain amount of castings and bubble it for 24 hours. And the tea's ready. In your own situation, if you were to have a gallon bucket and put a cup of castings in, I would suggest cheesecloth just to contain it a little. You could put a little aquarium bubbler in there for 24 hours and it'd be ready to go.
So the worm tea isn't just like the excess liquid fried.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up because when you get your runoff, it, it's not quite the same as the tea. It's more of a, what's the word I'm searching for? It's,
Concentrated?
well, it's,
Sorry.
what's the word? It has the worm's castings in it, but it also has the rotting food runoff. So it's a mixture of that.
So it's a bit closer to like a normal compost.
But again, that's what it'd be, a compost tea.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's the same principle that if there's an odor, you don't want to use it.
Right.
Yeah. Because that means the microbes have died and it would be harmful to your plants.
You have insects around. Do they compete the insects, for example, mealworms or flies?
Oh, okay. So there are things that get into the bin. And there are things that, the only one I know of that would be harmful to your worms would be centipedes. And usually they're not very big and they're territorial, so you won't find a lot of them. I've never found a centipede in, well, I have found them in our worm bins, but very rarely, very rarely. And you just take them out, just get rid of them. The other kinds of things like flies and fruit flies, which can easily get in with some of your scraps. There's just various ways to get rid of them. Some suggest that you just take a handheld vacuum and vacuum them out. And set little traps, vinegar traps or whatever. And some of that information is contained in these books. It's really beneficial to get something that you can refer to. People ask me these questions and I pick up the book and we look it up. The grubs, they will compete with the worms for the food. And you can just pick them out, get rid of them that way. But they don't hurt the worms. Trying to think what else we need to cover. We talked about food. We talked,
Wintering goes when you have.
oh, good question. Okay. So, very good question. The temperature in your bin needs to be between 55 and 79 degrees.
79?
79. So that's what we put on our flyer. That's where I read somewhere, but I've also seen other temperature ranges, but they're all within that basic range. If it's going to be outdoors, in the summer, you need to keep it in the shade. And in the winter, you probably need to bring it indoors where there's heat. You can bring it into a basement, a shop, a garage, if the garage doesn't get that cold. Just be sure that it doesn't get too cold or too hot. The Icenia fetida does tolerate the ranges of higher and lower ranges of temperature. So another, that's what I should speak to, is another way you can do the worms is outdoors. And the way we're doing it is with concrete block bins. And it would be helpful to leave, use hardware cloth in the bottom. We have plywood, but hardware cloth would allow them to go in, up and down in the cold weather, they would go deep and stay where the temperature is a constant 55 degrees. And in the hot weather, they can go deep or it's cooler. So if you had a bin like this, you just need to protect it. You could use insulation. This one has a pattern in their book for insulating for the cold weather.
You're saying with the concrete blocks that they would go like deeper than where your bin is, just into the earth collectively?
Yes,
Or, oh, okay.
but they come back up where the food is. Yeah, and we feed ours horse manure. And in the winter, we check our bins and they get down to 40 degrees, but we don't lose the worms. And they also, as the weather gets cooler, they make more cocoons and they'll hang out till the spring. The weather warms up and then they hatch.
So does the so but you said that you put plywood at the bottom of yours?
We did.
Okay. So has that just disintegrated by now, or are you, or
Possibly we. No, and if it did, it wouldn't be, the reason we did that was to keep moles and snakes out because we did have a mole problem and shrews. And that's why a hardware cloth would keep them out, but it would allow the worms to go deeper.
how big is?
I'm talking about a screen, 1/4-inch screen. Yeah. Something that would keep the varmints out. So, yes,
I was just gonna say also if you were keeping it in your garage or somewhere in the winter, there's all kinds, and you could use a grow mat or all kinds of heating pads that use maybe 50
oh, there you go.
that could keep it warm. So
That's true. Yeah. That's a good suggestion. So in the hot weather, even if you kept it in the shade, you'd want to be checking it and making sure that it wasn't getting too hot. Because it could, even in the shade, it could get too hot. Find the coolest place in your house. They can go indoors. I mean, in the house, if you had a place, if it came to that, air conditioning or whatever. Is there anything I haven't covered that?
Given the time, I would love to suggest that we have folks have an opportunity to come up and
Sure.
see the books and the goodies. I would like to quickly respond to the question about sterilized.
Yes, yes.
Put on my master gardener hat and do my best job on that one. So when we start seeds indoors, the customary best practice is to use sterilized containers and a sterilized seed starting. So we plant our seedlings, we water them generally from the bottom. And part of what we're trying to do is keep mold and other pathogens from growing on the surface soil. So the concern would be if we added worm castings that are not sterile. And I mean, it's worm poop, folks. Okay, it's worm poop. So if we added that, that could introduce pathogens that then could introduce the ability of things to grow on the soil and, disturb the plants that we don't want to happen. The seed itself has nutrients so that when the seedling begins to grow, its first appearance of leaves, those are actually the cotyledons, all that energy came from within the seed. By the time it gets its first real true seed or true leaves, then is the time either there or, depending on how quickly it's growing and what the plant is. Certainly by the time it gets its second set of true leaves, then fertilizing with a half-strength fertilizer, to your comment of not burning anybody. Using a half-strength fertilizer at that point is again the best practice. So those would be my comments to try to address that question.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're welcome. And the reasoning behind it, right?
Sure, sure.
Okay. Yeah. The other thing I want to say before we break so that folks can come see, I want to make sure that everybody knows that the Benton County Master Gardeners website has upon it the Public Seed Library Resources website. So the Public Seed Library Resources, you can access by using your phone to go to this QR code. So by using that, you can go to the site, find the site. Once on that site, you will see that the recording from this presentation today and prior events that were recorded are all going to be recorded or linked here at that website. Okay, so that's how you can find it. And that'll take a few days to get through the process of getting the file and, the whole webmaster thing. And then I will also announce that we'll have our next event, which is a pop-up clinic where Master Gardeners will be able to help answer your spring gardening questions. And that'll be on March 15th, Saturday morning in the Public Seed Library itself, back in the corner in the historic wing. So I welcome you to that event. Huh?
State of the Lily Fair.
Not at this time. So, again, please, I'd like everybody to be able to come and see.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, what we do.
Oops, whose phone?